Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, December the 3rd, 2025. There has been quite a lot going on in the UK, my home country, although I haven't been back there since 2019. We've had a budget. We've got a government that is really under a huge amount of pressure. This budget was a bit of a disaster, and in particular, there have been questions about the Chancellor of the Exchequer. In the UK, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is the finance minister, and whether she was lying or misleading Parliament. And one does think that her days are numbered in a political sense. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to have another look at the UK, what's going on, some of the big names in UK politics, like Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and also the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, that is one of the opposition parties, and also sort of the horoscope of the Starmer government and the time that Starmer became Prime Minister, just to do a check on what is going on with the UK astrologically. But that's my theme for this video, and I'll be talking about that at the end. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, December the 3rd, 2025. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time, as usual. So as far as what is going on, the moon is still in Taurus. So there you have the moon at 23 degrees Taurus at midday New York time, and the moon is making what's the moon doing? It's making a sextile to Saturn, and it's making a sextile to Jupiter. So you've got sort of moon sort of on the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. You could say that the moon is making a kite, because we're getting a grand trine between Mercury, Jupiter and Saturn, and the moon is opposition Mercury. So the moon is doing quite a lot. Of course, it's in the same place every month, so it's not an especially spectacular thing because the moon moves so quickly. And aside from that, there isn't a lot going on today. I mean, it is really about the moon sextiling Jupiter and Saturn. And so if you've got moon in Taurus sextiling Jupiter and Saturn, then you might regard the moon as being a stabilizing influence. There's always a lot to worry about. People are worrying about what's going to happen next. People are worried about the economy and recession and unemployment and sort of larger social issues. And so maybe there could be a sense of perspective today, although we should also notice that the moon is starting to move towards a conjunction to Uranus. That conjunction to Uranus is very much at the end of the day, or sort of into tomorrow. In fact, the moon is getting ready to move into Gemini. So it moves into Gemini. When does it move into Gemini? On tomorrow, Thursday, at 2:48 London time. So that does mean if you are in the Americas, the moon moves into Gemini this evening. So if you're in the Americas and you're active this evening, then you might experience a change. Suddenly things will become different. You might have a sense of variety, thinking you want to do something. Maybe you'll wake up if you're in the Americas, and just as you thought you were sort of grinding down into not grinding down, but sort of settling down in the evening, there might be a sudden blast of mental energy. And essentially that is all there is to be said. I mean, we can look at the sort of wider picture, what's happening over the next few days. I've talked about the grand trine. There is Mercury now at 21:59 Scorpio, making a trine to Jupiter and a trine to Saturn. And so that grand trine involving Jupiter and Saturn, it is getting closer, and for many of us, it might be a time when we can really understand what's going on. I mean, that's what all of us should be focusing on, really understanding what's happening. Sometimes people regard everything as just over their head. They don't understand. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to. They don't want to speak out. They don't even want to think. They just kind of assume that someone else is sorting it all out. And I think it is important that people comment. I was. Of course, yesterday, Monday. Well, I'm making this recording on Tuesday, so Monday is where in the city I am. It's the city council meeting. So on Monday, I always every other Monday you make your public comment, and so I made my public comment on Zoom. And what did I say? Well, I said I appreciated the fact that you could make public comments in American cities. That is a great thing about America, that you can. There is this. Certainly a veneer of democracy, of direct democracy, and of course it's not necessarily the whole truth, but at least you can say something. And I think it's important that everyone speaks up. People, because you've got this wonderful opportunity in America. You can make a Zoom call to your city, or you can go in person, and you can talk for, I don't know, in the city I am, it's for 3 minutes, and so you might be ignored, but it's the principle that counts. And if more people make comments, then it would make democracy more vibrant. If 20 people turned up and made comments, and people on the same thing, people might listen to them. But of course, as it happens, only a couple of people make comments. But how does this relate to Mercury being on the Jupiter Saturn? How does this relate to Mercury being part of a grand trine? Well, I'm just saying. It's important to make a comment. It's important to think. So I don't know, if you're in America and you've got a city council meeting coming up over the next few days, try and make a public comment. It doesn't matter what your sign is. With Mercury conjunct Jupiter, with Mercury trine Jupiter and trine Saturn, your opinion is as good as anyone else's. Everyone has the capacity to understand what's going on, particularly with this grand trine. Yeah, they've got the capacity to comment on it. So that's the position for sort of New York as a representative of America, if you like, but really of the whole world. I mean, why do I choose New York? I choose New York because it's convenient. I think half my audience come from the Americas, so it's sort of East Coast, so it's relatively close to Europe. And then the other place I have to consider is Sydney, Australia. So here is a chart for Sydney, set for noon. And so the moon it's earlier in the sign. The moon is making a sextile to the nodal axis. I mean, that's quite a mild aspect. I don't know. With moon sextile the north node, what does that say? Well, if you use your talents in the right way, then you can find a way of being able to tune into your destiny, and you can stick at it. That might be one way of interpreting it. But I think on balance, if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, possibly a quieter day than if you're in the Americas. It just may feel that nothing much is going on, and that's probably a good thing. And moving to the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the sun at the center of the solar system, we don't have. Again, it seems to be quite quiet. I know that we've got full moon tomorrow evening on Thursday. That's certainly something to look forward to. Maybe we heliocentrically still got Mars trine Chiron. Now that Mars trine Chiron is starting to fade, but with Mars trine Chiron, there are things that concern us, that we might be upset about. We we might want to stand out. And so we've got Mars trine Chiron at the same time as we've got Mercury in a grand trine with Jupiter and Saturn. So if you put those together, you might then say that it is a time to speak out. Chiron is a body, a minor planet that relates to being different, wanting to be different, perhaps wanting to rock the boat. If we see something that upsets us, we feel we have to comment on it, then we should comment on it. And if that means getting attention, maybe not favourable attention, but people might ask questions. What are we doing? Why are we sticking our neck out? Well, we're sticking our neck out because we are individuals, and it is maybe it's part of our destiny. It's part of who we are. And so, I think overall it's important that we think and we don't take things at face value. And we might be ready to say something that could be controversial, but if we feel that it's true, I think that there may be a responsibility to be open and even forthright. So now let me turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, December the 3rd, 2025. Aries. There is perhaps not a huge amount going on. I mean, the moon is in Taurus, and with the moon in Taurus, you may be thinking about, your priorities, what needs to be done, how you need to, look after yourself in a material sense. Sometimes Aries, you can neglect the material side of things, because you've got other things to do. You've got more important things to worry about. You've got to, you've got to take action. You've got to be spontaneous, and you don't want to be caught up in things which are just totally trivial. But with moon in Taurus, okay, the moon is in Taurus, every month, and so perhaps it's a time, every month where you can sort of recalibrate and look at how you're dealing with money, what new priorities need to be taken note of. And you may see that there are things that do need your attention, and you don't have to make a big fuss about it. But the moon, it makes an opposition to Mercury, and this moon opposition Mercury could encourage you to think. Moon is also sextile Jupiter, sextile Saturn. It encourages you to look at things and to ask yourself whether this is right. And perhaps those things have a financial dimension, which you shouldn't ignore. You shouldn't regard it as being beneath you. It's not. And with the moon making a sextiles to Jupiter and Saturn, you can intelligently understand how broader trends can impact you, and that might mean using your Aries dynamism to ask questions, to inquire, to say things that other people might not want to hear. And so that says something about the day. I mean, it's not just about thinking about money. I don't think you have to necessarily do anything in a concrete sense. I mean, you can still be curious, and you can be interested, and you remember that Mars is moving through Sagittarius. Mars is your ruler. I mean, of course, very soon Mars will be in Capricorn. I mean, relatively soon, middle of December, I think it is, that Mars moves into Capricorn. That is something to look forward to, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and I think that for many Arians, Mars moving into Capricorn, could be a real boost. But shorter term, I know that you probably don't feel that you want to do anything but in the short term, I think that your ability to get on with people is actually quite good. You can assert your identity. You know, you tell people who you are. I think it'll be very clear who you are. Okay, you might be worried that some people might not like who you are. I mean, that's always a danger, isn't it? But heliocentrically, we've got Mars trine Chiron, and that Mars trine Chiron. Okay, it's not as close as it used to be, but with Mars trine Chiron, you do have an opportunity to be yourself and not to be too concerned about who you are and what you have to offer. And I think that if you are genuine and you don't be too self-conscious, then Aries, I think that you can get the right kind of attention, and many people will appreciate you, and they will enjoy what you have to offer. And remember that Aries is a sign that is exciting, and in your own quiet way you give the impression that something is going on, but there's no obligation, there's no pressure. Taurus, the moon still moving through your sign, and the moon does make a few aspects of note. I mean, it does make an opposition to Mercury, and so we've got moon in Taurus, opposition Mercury in Scorpio, and this moon Mercury opposition, it could represent a bit of conflict, maybe sort of mental or verbal conflict. I mean, you can't agree with everyone, and you might hear something that you absolutely don't agree with, and it, as far as you're concerned, might not really be a case of being able to compromise. Some things you just have to go with. You have to make it clear that you have a particular opinion. Although when you've got moon opposition Mercury, you have to remember that you're dealing with the two communication planets, and so when you've got this opposition, that suggests that communication just may not be too easy. It could be that you and perhaps the person you're trying to communicate just find it difficult to meet halfway. And fundamentally, at the moment you are quite stubborn, and the moon in late Taurus is starting to move towards a conjunction with Uranus, and this moon Uranus conjunction is something that could encourage you to really dig your heels in. You are going to stick with who you are and what you believe, and you won't take kindly to other people who are contradicting you. I mean, that is the way it could work, but it might be a better idea to focus on other aspects. I mean, the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter, it's making a sextile to Saturn, and that moon sextile Jupiter, I mean, it could be quite a fortunate aspect, and it may be the case that there is always a way of talking that is harmonious, that gets people's attention in a pleasant way rather than a stressful way. There's always a way, but the question is, do you want to follow that path? Do you want to make the effort to be harmonious and gracious, and not to get caught up in your opinions or other people's opinions, and to be able to move on from the conflict? Well, you can, and so you have a bit of free will here, Taurus. You can choose how you express yourself, and it doesn't have to be a battle. I mean, I think it just could be a battle, and because Taurians can be very opinionated, and they don't always like change, and they don't really always want to accommodate another person's view, particularly if that other person is of themselves being unreasonable. So that's the way it the way it should be, to just not take things too seriously. I mean, you could take things too seriously. I mean, so that there is certainly that danger, but I think that it's probably unnecessary. I think that if you try to get a perspective, appreciate that some things aren't that important. You need to sort of think beyond your own ego, beyond beyond your own opinions. Yeah, you have opinions, and your opinions are perfectly valid, but there may be more important things. And if you can move beyond that and not take things too seriously, make a special effort not to be offended, then I think that you can make sense of the day, and perhaps it's also a question of red flags and bulls. You are the bull. Taurus has the bull as its symbol, and one thinks of the red flag, and was it the red one? Yeah, a red flag in front of a bull. Isn't that how it goes? And so you might be tempted to respond, but if you just laugh it off and sort of move on, I think that is the best way to handle things. Gemini. You probably feel right now that there isn't much that you absolutely need to do. There are things that you're still trying to assimilate, and part of that is connected with the fact that Mercury is now stationary. It's not stationary anymore. It's starting to move forward, and Mercury is in Scorpio, and Mercury in Scorpio, don't forget that Scorpio is a mute sign, and so when we say mute, well, Scorpions don't make much noise, and usually it's the case that Geminis do have a lot to say, and I think you will have a lot to say, even with the Mercury in Scorpio. But will you have a lot to say like today? And I think the answer might be no. I think that you might want to say things, but is the situation going to be absolutely right? Are you going to have a chance to clearly express your view? And I think that, with the moon making an opposition to Mercury, perhaps not. I mean, the problem with moon opposition Mercury, moon's in Taurus, opposition Mercury in Scorpio, is that you might just not be as easygoing as usual, perhaps because there are things you don't understand. There are perhaps things you're just working through, maybe things of an emotional nature, things you're keeping to yourself. If you're keeping things to yourself, then it's obviously very difficult to talk about them. I mean, there are some things you kind of half want to keep to yourself, but you're not quite sure what you should reveal, and you're not quite sure how you should respond. And if you were to say anything substantial today, then it just may not go down well. Or you might just be dissatisfied. You feel that you've said some of the words, but not all of the words, and it's just not right. And instead, Gemini, it just might be better if you were to, work things through in your own way, and make sure that everything is comprehensible. And do work on that. And if it's something you don't understand, you can make an effort, and you can, in your own way, get to grips with the truth of the matter. Now, one potential problem here, Gemini, is that actually you have quite a lot of energy. You just feel it. You feel maybe even a bit nervous. You just feel you've got to do something. You want to do something. And the question is whether or not you fully express yourself. And I think it would be dangerous if you were to expend energy in a sort of social, sort of interpersonal way, and maybe you need to find ways of expressing your energy in a fashion that is more personal, is sort of more disciplined, and it just could be just about the job at hand. Whatever it is you regard as your main priority, it may be a priority that you're not taking particularly seriously, and maybe that's where you should put the energy, just making sure that you do a really good job, whatever it is. And I know that perfection is an impossible ideal, but maybe it's something you can nonetheless aim for. You throw everything you've got into just making things just as good as possible. And if you can do that, then sooner or later you will get the rewards. And continuing on the theme of being somewhat reticent. I mean, I think reticence is a part of today, and not revealing things and doing things on your own, perhaps not telling other people what you're doing, and the activities you do on your own, without other people's help, can be useful. I mean, the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter. It's also making a sextile to Saturn. I think that moon sextile Saturn may be particularly important. Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn is in a part of your chart which is about your ambitions. Wherever it is that you think you're going, you're trying to hack a path for yourself, and I think you're having a reasonable amount of success. But you can take action to further improve your prospects, but it's a kind of action that you don't have to talk about. You do it in your own way, and you as far as possible, you do keep a low profile, and that's the way forward. And I think in general, Gemini, the fewer people who are involved, the better. Now, if you're in the Americas, then that means that this evening the moon does move out of Taurus and into Gemini. And I think that is a big change. I mean, the moon's moving into Gemini. And when it moves into Gemini, it will make a trine to Pluto. You do become more dynamic, a lot more dynamic. And you finally realize that you can get things together. You can perhaps afford to be more sociable. I don't know what you're doing this evening if you're in the Americas, but maybe because of that change, you can be more gregarious and be more open. But I'll be talking more about the moon moving into your sign when I do your horoscope for tomorrow, which is Thursday. Cancer. Moon is making sextiles to Jupiter and Saturn. It's also making an opposition to Mercury. So these sextiles and the opposition, I mean, it's certainly action orientated, and I think that you can certainly make an impact. And it's not the kind of action where you have to take risks or do anything dangerous, but it's important that you are out and about, that you're able to interact, and that you can see ways in which you can have an influence, because your influence can be powerful and certainly helpful. And probably the aspect that you should really be focusing on is the sextile between the moon and Jupiter. Jupiter is of course moving through your sign. The moon is exalted in Taurus, so it's making a really rather fortunate sextile to Jupiter, and that means that hopefully you're feeling good about yourself. You feel that you're in the right place, that you're able to tell everyone what's on your mind, that you can be sociable, and Well, telling everyone on your mind. Okay, Moon is opposition Mercury. So yeah, you can certainly communicate. There's a lot that can be said, and that doesn't mean that you have to talk your head off. You absolutely don't. I mean, Moon in Taurus is fundamentally looking for stability, but it's stability within the social milieu, and so perhaps you can become sort of confident of who you are and where you stand in terms of, I don't know, friends, associates, other people, whoever you have contact with. And if you do need to say something, it just creates the right impression because you know what to say. I mean, you know what to say if you think about it. Well, if you don't think about it, it might be different. I mean, the moon opposition Mercury is one of the main aspects of the day, and you could say that with moon opposition Mercury, you could say, well, that's about saying the wrong things. It's about being irritated or even irritating other people. And it's therefore important that you don't get caught on that moon opposition Mercury. Yeah, there are things being said which might annoy you. There are things you just want to say just for the sake of it. The first words that come to mind, you just want to say it, and who cares what happens. But if you just give it some thought and try to be positive and not feel that you have to cause chaos just for the sake of it. But you wouldn't. I don't think you would. I don't think that's what today is about. And overall, Cancer, I think that you are pretty lucky. You can be lucky with the moon making a sextile to Jupiter and a sextile to Saturn. Now that moon sextile Saturn could be about your own view, and you have a view of the world, and this view of the world has been cultivated perhaps over the years, and if you hold firm to this view and you don't get distracted by sort of minor irritants represented by that moon opposition Uranus, that's going to help you be yourself in a way that is natural. And if you just hold to what you believe, you don't have to say anything controversial, because your beliefs are guiding your actions and your stance. They're not encouraging you, hopefully, to just spout about your opinions. That's not how this moon sextile Saturn should work. And also with this moon sextile Saturn, it's quite fortunate as far as relationships are concerned. I think that you do have the capacity to get on with people and to create links, and there may be a little bit of effort. This is moon sextile Saturn, so moon, the sextile, a sixth of a circle. 6 is 3 times 2. So with 3, we've got the ease aspect of the sextile, but then you've got the 2, which represents the opposition, the conflict, and that's why a sextile is a slightly more dynamic aspect than a trine. And so with a bit of effort, you have the opportunity to get on with people and to move beyond any sort of minor arguments that have the potential to spoil things, but they needn't spoil things, because you can just rise above the matter and see what's important, and not feel that you always have to express your opinions. Yeah, sure, you can express your opinions if you want to. I said at the beginning that it's going to be quite easy for you to express your opinions, whatever those opinions might be. But just because it's easy doesn't mean that you have to express your opinions. And perhaps one thing about today might be just giving people the benefit of the doubt, at least for the moment. Leo, you can get attention at the moment. There's something about you that really does stand out. You stand out as someone who has got something to say, and who is perhaps even worth following. I mean, the moon is in Taurus. Moon is still in Taurus, and the moon is making sextiles to Jupiter and Saturn. And so, if you have got something that's important to you, then keep going with it. Don't feel you have to be shy. You hopefully are focused on something important, something you regard as being important. Especially now that Mercury has moved back into especially now that Uranus has moved back into Taurus. So Uranus in Taurus is about perhaps your individuality, what makes you unique. And maybe late today and into tomorrow the moon does make a conjunction to Uranus, but it's still applying to that conjunction to Uranus, and so that does allow you to stand out. And the moon additionally is making sextiles to Jupiter and Saturn, and I think those sextiles between Jupiter and Saturn give you an opportunity to think about what is important to you. And you don't have to apologize, but at the same time you don't have to assume a conflict. You don't have to feel that you have to fight to express yourself, or fight to tell everyone who you are and what you want. I mean, okay, you might have a concept of conflict, but ideally that's something you should avoid, because I think it's fundamentally unnecessary. And the moon is part of a larger structure. So we've got a grand trine in water signs, and so we've got Mercury, Jupiter and Saturn are all in trine with one another. And that grand trine, Leo, is potentially quite emotional. It's quite deep. It may relate to your unconscious, and on the surface, it seems to be not on the surface. So on the surface, it seems to be something that you don't want to express. That you know that you've got powerful feelings, and there are things that may recently have been hidden that are perhaps you're starting to understand, and it might seem very much connected with your own private world. But then the moon makes aspects to all the elements of that grand trine. It makes an opposition to Mercury. It makes a sextile to Jupiter. It makes a sextile to Saturn. And the moon is in a high-profile part of your chart. So it could be, in terms of who you are and what you're trying to project, that things taking place at quite a deep level can propel you forward. So it could be like the iceberg. The iceberg, what do they say about the iceberg? That most of the iceberg is underwater. Sure, most of the iceberg is underwater, and there's a lot of action happening at an unconscious level, but some of that iceberg is above the surface, and some of that energy and that power can be revealed. It's not just about revelation, it's about action. It's about you really wanting to make things happen and wanting to make an impact, and you certainly can make an impact, and at the same time you can do it in a way that gets you attention, and the right kind of attention, because if you make the effort, Leo, you can be very, very effective in a social sense. You know how to put people at their ease. There's something about you that is attractive, and so Leo, make the most of your power. You have probably much more power than you realize, and it could be the kind of power that you feel ever so slightly uncomfortable with. But if you harness it, then you can actually use it to get sort of real results in the real world. Virgo, it's a day when you feel that something should be happening. You're not just content to do nothing. And So what is it that you would like to do? I think you need to have a focus, because if you don't have a focus, you might find yourself getting quite frustrated. It might all turn in on itself, and you could get angry, not just annoyed with yourself, but you could also be annoyed with other people. So Virgo, what is that number one task? What is, or maybe it's not a task, something that you enjoy. What is it that you would like to throw all your energy into? And once you realize what it is, well, then you can give it your best shot. So perhaps you need to address the frustrations before they become frustrations. So frustration is unnecessary today. I mean, that's really what I'm saying. And you shouldn't think that you should be you shouldn't think that you have to hold back on anything. You don't. But the sooner you start to apply yourself, the sooner you do things that you enjoy, or at least that you feel are meaningful, the easier it is for you to be kind of relaxed in what you do, and the lower the chance of you actually demonstrating your frustration through, for example, words or actions that are just over hasty, and you might assume a conflict, perhaps a verbal conflict. Remember, Moon is opposition Mercury, and so with that Moon opposition Mercury, there is a danger there that you say something that is unwise, that you are provocative. But why would you be provocative? And one reason you might be provocative is because you feel you can't do anything, because you're feeling frustrated. Now, if we look closer at what's happening astrologically today, then okay, we see that Mercury is starting to make the grand trine. I mean, Mercury is moving towards trine of Jupiter, trine of Saturn, and so there is the energy. That might be one way of looking at it. And so with this energy, you want to do something with it, and so it's all happening with this grand trine. And then the Moon comes along. The Moon does make an opposition to Mercury. It also makes sextiles to Jupiter and Saturn. And this Moon is providing you with a way to use your energy. Now that the Moon is in Taurus, it's still in Taurus. Okay, the Moon does go into Gemini if you're in the Americas later in the day, but the Moon is just facilitating self-expression. And because the Moon is in Taurus, it's a fixed sign. It's giving you focus, and you need to focus on things which allow you to sort of rise above yourself. I mean, not in a vague or even necessarily spiritual way, just rising above yourself and just seeing the broad picture, getting a sense of perspective, and at the same time seeing what you can do, because you do have a lot of energy. Things really are moving, and you want action. And so if you want action, then you need to give yourself action, but action in a way that is just in accord with who you are. And there are certainly things that you want, and things that you're trying to get together, and that's where the energy should be focused. Libra. You might find, Libra, that things are slightly complicated, perhaps more complicated than you would like them to be. And part of the reason for that is that the Moon is still in Taurus. Okay, the Moon does move into Gemini later in the day if you're in the Americas, but for most of the day, perhaps all of the day, the Moon is in Taurus. And with the Moon in Taurus, Libra, you just might find that there are some things that you're not necessarily in the mood for, and you don't want to reveal too much. And if that's the way you feel, then probably that's a way to go with it. And at the same time, Libra, there may be things that you start to take seriously. I mean, one aspect we have today is an opposition between the moon and Mercury. And so, with this moon-Mercury opposition, that could be about irritants, things annoying you, things that you have to deal with that you don't want to deal with. And this moon-Mercury opposition is across the finance axis of your chart. So as soon as you start thinking about money, you might find yourself getting annoyed. Why would you get annoyed? Well, you might get annoyed because you're not doing anything. You're almost annoyed at the thought rather than rather from being annoyed in terms of the subject matter. And so perhaps the best way of dealing with the moon opposition Mercury is to be direct. And if something is bothering you, then just address it straight away. And the sooner you address it, the better. And this Mercury opposition to Moon, it may not be a bad aspect if we see the broader picture. I mean, Mercury is starting to make a sextile to, Mercury is making trines to Jupiter and Saturn. And this grand trine between Mercury, Jupiter and Saturn, for you, Libra, is quite sort of down to earth. It is about material stuff. It's about organization. It's about ambition. It's about money. It's how you're trying to sort yourself out, on a material level. And in fact, Libra, you can be very effective when it comes to the material world. Fundamentally, you know what's important, and the moon opposition Mercury may just be a reminder. So if you get annoyed about something, you feel that something's being done wrong, it's perhaps a good thing because it's encouraging you to act. And so, the answer to some of your questions, particularly sort of those questions relating to the material side of things, the answer just could be to stay where you are and just to go into things in a way that is really searching, looking for answers, not being satisfied with surface appearances. And if you can do that, then I think that you can rapidly solve the issue, and not just solve the issue. I think you can create a situation where you can really get things moving in a material sense. And it just requires you to just make that first move, to be prepared to just get into something really deeply and find out what it's all about. And once you do that, I think that you find that things naturally come together. And if things are naturally coming together, that may give you an opportunity then to start to see things in perspective. I think perspective is one thing that you possibly do need. I mean, there are individual things that require your attention, but you shouldn't regard any single thing as being a matter of life and death. It's not. It's just something that you have to deal with, and if you can deal with it, then everything will come together. And by the end of the day, you may actually start to feel more relaxed, particularly if you're in the Americas. Moon moving out of Taurus into Gemini is just going to make you feel better about yourself, and you'll be able to sort of understand what things are all about, and what seemed to be a difficult issue could become something relatively minor because you have that perspective. If you're not in the Americas, I mean, don't worry. Tomorrow the moon will be in Gemini, so overall, Libra, if things do seem a bit complicated, don't worry about it. Don't be afraid. Be prepared to see things through, and you don't have to just exist on the surface. Sometimes you have to sort of dive into it all, dive into the deeps, the depths, and really know what's going on. And once you know what's going on, things are going to feel a lot better. Scorpio. The moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and Mercury is part of a grand trine. So we have a kite formation, and this kite formation is something that it's going to affect all of us, but I think it does affect you in particular. So if we think about what exactly is going on, well, Mercury is moving through your sign. I mean, you knew that. And Mercury is making trines to Jupiter and Saturn, so we've got this grand trine. I think that this grand trine, which is going to get stronger over the next couple of days, is a real plus. It allows you to feel good about yourself and believing that you are getting it together, that you feel an understanding of what your place is. And when I say place, I'm thinking more in a sort of a spiritual rather than a material sense. What is your role? What is your destiny? And I think that this grand trine is really helping you define that. Yet the moon is getting involved in this grand trine because the moon's in Taurus. It's making an opposition to Mercury, and the moon might represent some kind of outside event. You have your own way of looking at things, and your own way of looking at things. Well, it's fine. It's good enough, and it makes you feel good. I mean, I think it's great that with this grand trine, you're able to get a feeling that you're moving towards your key mission, whatever that mission might be. Everyone has got different missions, but you feel you're on the right track. But the moon is a challenge. And the moon is a challenge. It might come from someone else, moon opposition Mercury. You may be being asked to justify yourself. I mean, you might not be directly asked to justify yourself, but it could be that the world reacts to you in a questioning way, or at least that's how it feels. And and because of that, you might find yourself asking questions because you're being asked questions, and so your first impulse might be to be rather resentful if you're getting pushback, if you're being questioned, if you're being challenged, maybe people challenging you, just maybe events challenging you, and the key thing is to get over that irritation. If you're being challenged, if you're being made to feel annoyed, then I think that in many respects that's a good thing, because it's allowing you to fine-tune your overall vision. And so that may be how the kite works, because the kite is this formation, with the moon making aspects to all the components of the grand trine. And so don't be dismissive of other people. Don't necessarily be annoyed with other people. And you might think that other people are doing things deliberately, that they have their own plans, they have their own agenda, but maybe you can depersonalize things. People act not just because of their own destiny, but because of other people's destinies. So we're all part of a whole. It's like, I don't know, it's a very complicated mechanism, the universe, and everything has to be balanced, and everyone has their role, and people may do things not for themselves, but perhaps because of you. Maybe the forces of fate have just encouraged someone to do something or say something, and the reason they say something or do something, it's not necessarily about their personality. It's about them having a job to do. Their job is to encourage you to think or to rethink. And so, don't necessarily apportion blame today. Okay, sometimes people do something which is awful and requires blame and criticism, but very often people are like sort of instruments of the cosmos. We can be individuals on one level, but we can also just be instruments, all of us. And we do not have 100% free will. And so if someone does something unexpected, they could be doing you a favor. They might not even know what they're doing. And so that might be a way to deal with the moon making an opposition to Mercury. And also the moon is starting to move towards a conjunction of Uranus. And this conjunction with Uranus, okay, it might not be exact until the end of the day, or into tomorrow if you're not in the Americas. But that moon conjunct Uranus can be about a surprise, and people doing things that you hadn't necessarily expected, but you have to respond in the right way, and you shouldn't necessarily see it as being an affront, a provocation. Instead, perhaps see it as a stimulus to you to make the most of who you are. And heliocentrically, you shouldn't forget that Mars is still making a trine to Chiron, and this heliocentric Mars Chiron aspect, you might not feel it, but maybe you can. And what that heliocentric Mars Chiron aspect is asking you to do is to be different, to maybe move outside your comfort zone, especially if you see that something is wrong, that something needs to be said, that maybe everyone else is wrong, but you've got the right answer, or not even the answer. You've got the right level of sensitivity. Not everyone is sensitive. Some people can be totally unsensitive in terms of other people's problems, other people's suffering. It's not just people, animals, the environment, whatever it is. But you're different. And if you're different, you have the perspective that other people are lacking. Maybe you have the compassion that other people are lacking. And maybe with this Mars trine Chiron, that is encouraging you to do something, or at least to say something. It may not be entirely comfortable, but if something has to be said, it has to be said. Sagittarius. On the surface, Sagittarius, it might seem to be a rather boring day. I mean, boring, maybe not a great deal going on. You can't always have things going on. I mean, I know that overall it's quite an active time for you. I mean, because we've got 3 planets in Sagittarius, so Mars, Sun, and Venus. But you have sort of islands of inactivity, and maybe today, Wednesday, is an island of inactivity, when there is nothing that you absolutely have to do, and instead you want to just take stock of what's going on. I mean, that's what you perhaps should be doing, taking stock. Now, that might seem boring, taking stock, but every now and then you do have to take stock, and it's not going to last forever. In fact, if you're in the Americas, sometime this evening, the moon moves out of Taurus and into Gemini, and I think that when the moon moves into Gemini, that's for you is quite action orientated, and it can be about other people and other people's behavior. So there are things about to happen, about to go, about to unfold, but short term, for most of the day, maybe even all of the day, it just feels that things are slow. And additionally, you yourself are perhaps being more critical, and you're starting to see downsides as well as upsides. You can see how things could go wrong. That could border onto the pessimistic. So, it's like you have all this enthusiasm with these planets in Sagittarius, but there's also a realism there, and that realism feels slightly discordant. and you just feel that you just can't throw everything you've got into your life, because other things have to be considered. And it might also be the case that certain people seem a bit slow, and maybe they are slow, and it's perhaps a good thing that they're slow, because maybe this is just this island where you can, as I said, where you can take stock. And many Sagittarians today are going to be capable of very serious thinking. And serious thinking, you could say, is a bit boring, having to really look at the details of something, making sure that it's all in order, and also thinking about the way things can go wrong. That you can do also. So there's nothing naive about you right now. You can see through things, and you have a realism to you, and you really make the most of this realism. It's there for a purpose. And so Sagittarius, ask yourself just what needs to be done, and don't complain about it, and by all means think about the future, think about all the things you would like to do, all the exciting things you would like to do, all these exciting things that not just you'd like to do, you can do them, but you just have to align yourself first. And I think that would be a good use of today's energies. Now the moon does move into Gemini, well, this evening if you're in the Americas. It won't be until tomorrow if you're not in the Americas. But if you are an American Sagittarius, then this evening things could change, things could brighten up, and there'll be more things going on, and you may also see a change in other people. Perhaps other people will be more exciting, and they'll have more to offer. And if you're not in the Americas, well, the moon will be in Gemini tomorrow, and I think that the moon in Gemini is going to certainly make things more interesting. But at the same time, the moon will be making an opposition to Venus, and so that moon opposition Venus may have implications for relationships. But anyway, I'll talk about that tomorrow when I do your horoscope for Thursday. Capricorn. The grand trine involving Mercury, Jupiter and Saturn is getting stronger. This grand trine, is important for you. After all, it involves Saturn, and Saturn is your ruler. And I regard this grand trine as being something that is very, very positive. It allows things to move, and at the same time, there's quite a sort of social element to this grand trine. It involves, Jupiter, which is in Cancer, which is in your opposite sign, and it also involves Mercury. So Mercury is, the communication planet, and Mercury is trine Saturn, and so Mercury making this trine to Saturn. There's a lot you can say, a lot you can do. You can be, very, effective in any social situation. You can just circulate, and it's not going to be difficult. You might regard it as being difficult. Perhaps there's a bit of a Capricorn pessimism coming in there. You may be saying, what is the point? But I think if you do make an effort, then I think that you can really enjoy your social life. In fact, you don't have to make an effort, because this is a grand trine. Now, as far as today is concerned, the moon is in Taurus, and the moon kind of links up with this grand trine, because the moon creates a kite formation, because the moon is opposition Mercury, sextile Jupiter, sextile Saturn, and so the moon creates a bit of dynamism to this grand trine, and it reminds you that it's all very well just talking, being with people, interacting. But, what is it all about? I think that's part of a problem of this grand trine on its own. And the moon, to an extent, may help resolve this problem. And the moon in Taurus could represent you. It represents fundamentally who you are, and what makes you special. And it also links with your creativity, your fundamental creativity. And if you are spending a lot of time with other people, if you are very sociable, sometimes your own creativity and your own individuality can be forgotten. And what the moon is doing is it is allowing you to be yourself, but also you can be in the center of things. And so you don't have to regard it as being a sort of an either or. Either you spend a lot of time with other people, or you just retreat and just tune into what you're good at. It's not an either or situation. And I think that you can be yourself and also be right in the middle of things. So nothing needs to be compromised. And at the same time, like yesterday, you do need to have an idea about where it's all going. Capricorn, is a sensible sign. I mean, it's got a tradition of being sensible. Okay, there are some Capricorns who are not sensible, but it's an earth sign, Capricorn, and usually you're quite sensible. But sometimes you can be distracted, and so whatever you're doing today, you don't want to just blindly follow other people's leads. I think I was saying this yesterday. There is a chance you get distracted and you move into areas that you don't necessarily want to be in, or you put energy into things which could turn out to be destructive. Now, why would that be the case? It would be the case, I think, because it's just all too easy. And so maybe the moon opposition Mercury is also creating some dynamic tension there. It's good you've got the grand trine, but sometimes things have to be questioned. And so as you're going through the day, you can question. You can ask yourself, is this the right thing to be doing? And you can ask other people, is this the right thing to be doing? And so be open and be enthusiastic, and perhaps be available to an extent, but don't lose your criticality. I think you do have a critical mind, and maybe the moon opposition Mercury represents this critical mind, and you can ask important questions, and you don't have to take things at face value. You don't have to believe in anyone. But you can be with people without having to believe them, without even having to trust them. Trust is not necessarily a precondition of sociability. I don't think anyone should be trusted at the moment, but that doesn't mean to say it's going to be a bad day. You have to take everyone as they are. Different people have different ideas, different sets of motivation, and sometimes these people are useful. Other times, they could lead you astray. I don't think you will be led astray, but there's just some danger there, that you come across something over the course of a day that you just find attractive and you want to follow it through. It seems even a bit glamorous and you want to follow it through, but if you were to follow it through, I don't think it would be in your best interests. And so, the sooner you can ask the questions that need to be asked, well, the better. Now, one particular aspect we have is the moon making a sextile to Saturn. So that this moon Saturn sextile, that could say something about relationships, and it indicates to me that the right relationship can really work, and there's something very constructive about it. So that's another good reason why you should look at each person you meet over the course of the day. Look at them carefully, and ask yourself whether they can be trusted. Yeah, but even if they can't be trusted, maybe you can work with them in a short term sense, perhaps because you've got a common interest, and maybe that's what the moon sextile Saturn is saying. So moon sextile Saturn, you know how to get on with people, and there is something quite constructive about it. And also do consider your own influence. Saturn can perhaps go some way towards controlling the moon, and of course Saturn is your ruler. So it does look, Capricorn, as if there are other people to deal with, but of course the reality is that some Capricorns are going to be completely isolated today. That's the way it is. I mean, I'm saying that from a statistical point of view. And you might find you meet no one. You don't want to talk to anyone. You might be a hermit. You might be a professional hermit. If you are a hermit, these aspects still exist. The grand trine still affects you. The moon opposition Mercury still affects you. And if you are not with other people, then you still feel that things are happening. You can make them happen, yourself. And maybe we're talking about different aspects of who you are, and you perhaps have a chance to bring together disparate elements of your personality and sort of bring them all together, and to really create something. And additionally, to be able to ask yourself questions. And when you ask yourself questions that may be difficult to answer but not impossible to answer, then that in itself has a certain dynamism and can really bring things down to earth. And then you can have a great sense of who you are and what you can achieve. Aquarius. Moon is still moving through Taurus, for most of the day if you're in the Americas. If you're not in the Americas, then for all of the day. And with the moon moving through Taurus, your basic inclination is to stick to what is safe, what you know and what you trust, and you don't really want to put yourself out. Nonetheless, there might be things that you have to pay attention to. I mean, the moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and the moon opposition Mercury might indicate, for example, a message, a phone call, something being said to you. It could be a letter, something that perhaps forces you to be more open and recognize that you just can't see everything in terms of yourself. So you have to pay some attention to the outside world, and the outside world may be knocking on your door, may be trying to communicate with you, tell you something. I mean, it may not even be a literal phone call, a literal knock on the door. It just might be something you read, something you understand, and you see that your own personal individual approach may not quite be good enough. But I don't want to make it out that you're being sort of too negative or too much of an introvert. I think that there are things going on today which do look pretty positive. I mean, we have this growing influence of the grand trine. This grand trine, not quite exact, but in a few days' time it will be. And Mercury is getting close to a trine of Saturn. Additionally, the moon is making a sextile to Saturn, and that moon sextile Saturn does strike me as being quite constructive. And there are things you can there are things you can do which just can make things better for you, which can allow you to concentrate on what matters. And that moon sextile Saturn could well have a financial element. Now that Saturn has gone back into Pisces, it could be that the average Aquarian is having to think about money more than usual, not necessarily in a bad way. In fact, with this grand trine involving Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn, I think that you're having plenty of ideas about money. So if money has been an issue in the past, I think that you can be constructive and you can see ways, hopefully, to improve your financial position, or at least to have a better understanding of it. And if you need to make money, I think that the grand trine this grand trine involving Saturn should be useful. And then you've got the moon making that sextile, moon making the sextile to Saturn. So Aquarius, it does seem that there is something you can do today which can give your finances a boost. It's something that requires a little bit of effort. It's sort of effort and skill, put together, and it should be quite straightforward. It should be quite easy. So don't feel that nothing can be done. I mean, I think that might be your immediate reaction to today, with the moon being in Taurus. But the moon is not going to be in Taurus forever. And this evening, if you're in the Americas, the moon does move out of Taurus and moves into Gemini. And if you're not in the Americas, then tomorrow the moon will be moving through Gemini. And I think with that moon moving into Gemini, you're going to be less focused on yourself and your own security, and you're going to be starting to think about how you can make the most of everything, and indeed how you can enjoy yourself. And if you're in the Americas, then this evening might be quietly enjoyable, and I think that probably the evening may well be the best part of the day. Pisces. Well, I'm talking about this grand trine. I think this grand trine is important. I think it's worth talking about. The fact that Mercury is starting to make aspects to Jupiter and Saturn, and of course Saturn is moving through Pisces, and so overall Pisces, it is a time when things are moving, when perhaps if things have been stuck in the past, now there is real action, and things just might not be as difficult as you had imagined. And so keep working with this grand trine. I don't know what you're doing with it, whether you're doing anything with it, but if there's something you want to do, particularly if it's something fun, or either fun or connected with your spirituality or self-exploration, that kind of thing, with this grand trine, can all be very useful. And you don't necessarily have to do things on your own. Mercury is now direct, and Mercury of course rules Virgo, your opposite sign, and it could be that there is another person who can really help get things together, who can really help you move. Maybe on your own you can't create the kind of action that you'd like to create, but with another person's help, maybe anything is possible. Now, the moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and with this moon opposition Mercury, it's possible that there is someone who appears to annoy you because it's an opposition. Someone's maybe does something, says something, expresses something that you don't appreciate, that you find irritating. But the people who are most annoying can often be the most useful. And the moon is part of this grand trine. So you've got the moon. Well, the moon is not part of a grand trine, but it's part of a larger formation, a kite. So the moon is aspecting, all the planets in this grand trine. And so that moon opposition Mercury perhaps gives you an opportunity to make the most of the energies involved. And maybe moon opposition Mercury is saying you have to make the effort to communicate. Maybe there is someone you need to talk to, who, as I've suggested, you may not get on with all the time. Maybe there have been difficulties, arguments in the past, but you need to get over that. And with Moon opposition Mercury, by getting through to the right person, then that might really set things off, and of course, in a very creative and constructive way. And when we think about grand trines, we often think about things moving very quickly, and things can certainly move quickly for you at the moment. But there is a serious side, Pisces. You're capable of serious thinking, planning, considering what could go wrong. So there's nothing careless about you today. You do seem to be quite grounded, and if you are asking a lot of questions and you're having doubts, that is a good thing up to a point. But it is possible that you take things too far. So you might have a lot of opportunities in front of you. Maybe opportunities that could be facilitated with at least one other person, but you could also have questions. And the key thing is not to allow these questions to get out of control. And maybe that's also linked with the fact that we have this Moon opposition Mercury. Moon opposition Mercury can be about trying to get things right, trying to really work something out, and also because it's an opposition, and perhaps seeing things that we don't always appreciate, that seem to be a threat, that seem to be maybe holding us back, or holding you back. I'm not a Pisces. So if they're holding you back, then, well, it's tempting to give up. I mean, that's the worst manifestation of all of this. But if you have doubts, you have to know that there is a way through. And I think it's very important that you're constructive. And, it's certainly not a good idea to be over-optimistic, but you don't want to allow pessimism to get out of control. And that could be one way in which this grand trine can work. Grand trines can work in all sorts of ways. And, we normally think about grand trines as being positive, but grand trines are about any feeling, particularly if it's a grand trine in water, any feeling that gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that feeling could be doubt and pessimism. So you don't want to get onto any sort of negative trips here. It's good to be realistic, but you don't want to take realism too far. So it's very important, Pisces, that you're able to get the balance right. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was a hexagram number 7, which is the army. In fact, I've missed out the definite particle. Let me just put that in. So if we're dealing with the army, I mean, we're dealing with a group here. I mean, that's we're not on our own. Really, we have to think about our role in a hierarchy. Let me just type this out. The army. Sorry about that. There we go. The army. So we are part of a hierarchy. We're part of a structure, and it's kind of suggesting that that's the way it should be, that maybe we shouldn't feel that we need to do things on our own, especially if there's some external threat, whatever that threat might be. If there is a threat, well, usually the best way of dealing with a threat is to be linked with other people, and perhaps to abandon some of our individuality and be connected, and also to understand our particular role. We all have a role, and so whatever you're doing, ask yourself, what is your role within the organization? And even if you're not in an organization, even if you're a complete individualist, you still have to think about you and society, or perhaps you and your family, and what your particular role is. And it seems that there is a chance, because the second line moves, and with the second line moving, that there can be some kind of recognition. There is a symbolism here of getting an award or some kind of decoration, a decoration for your actions, in that sort of military sense. And so you're able to stand out, but you're able to stand out as being part of something. It's not like you being the individual doing something completely on your own. It's about you acting with the group and you understanding your responsibility and understanding what needs to be done. And there may be a certain amount of bravery there, you realizing that it's a time to sort of stand out and do what is needed. And and that gets recognized. And even if there's no one around you, you can do something in a constructive way. You are part of something larger than yourself, and you do something that really does matter, that does get recognition. Now, the fifth line moves as well, and the fifth line is talking about a threat. We're talking about the army here. I mean, so when you talk about army, why do you have an army? You have an army to deal with a threat, very often, and it's talking about an invasion, but it's also talking about a strong response. So you have to respond strongly to a threat, but not too strongly. So you have to do whatever you can do, whatever is needed to deal with the threat. But if you go too far and you're perhaps over aggressive, or you from a military point of view, I don't know, you go wading in, you go slaughtering your enemies left, right, and centre. That's not what it's about. And you don't feel you have to go too far. You can make some gains here, you can make progress, but you shouldn't push your gains too far. You should be happy with just, if you can just stabilize the situation, that is good enough. You don't have to go further. And so that's perhaps what the army is about. And the army does switch. In fact, it turns upside down, because we've got the second and the fifth lines moving. And so the army turns upside down. So if you compare the two charts, you can see what I mean. We move to hexagram 8, holding together. So going back, you see it's now upside down. But holding together is another hexagram which is about other people, and it's about being part of something else. And so this is a reminder that you don't have to do everything alone, and that if you can be part of a group, then the group will look after itself, and the group will look after you. And finally, I just want to look at the United Kingdom. I don't know whether you're interested in the United Kingdom, but there's stuff going on, and we have politically, we have a government that's really in decline. It's in real trouble, but we've got this problem that we don't have an election for 3 years. So it's sick, but it can't die. That's at least it can't die anytime soon. And so as far as let's look at some charts. So with this government, I mean, let's start by looking at the government itself, just to remind ourselves of what really is happening. And so here is a chart of the government. This is the moment that Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, and it is a chart that I'm not very comfortable with. I think it's always a problem when you begin something just before the new moon. because the moon was waning when the Starmer government when Starmer came to power, and then there was a new moon just after. So that gives us the idea that in many respects the government is sort of past orientated. It's having to deal with the problems of the past, and and of course it spends a lot of time blaming the Tories. So, for example, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, when she talks about the supposed difficulties of the British economy, spends a lot of time blaming the Tories, blaming Brexit. And that might say something about the fact that this government did come to power just before a new moon. The government is stuck in the past. And if you've got a government, you want that government to be dynamic, to have a program, to be very positive, to represent, to have a real vision. Like Tony Blair in 1997. Whatever you think of Tony Blair, there was a real blast of positivity when he became elected, but not with this government. And perhaps this reflects the fact that it's a waning moon. Starmer became prime minister on a dying cycle, and the sort of the deathliness of the Starmer regime, is indicated also by the chart of Starmer himself becoming leader. So this is a chart of Starmer when Starmer became leader of the Labour Party. So he became leader of the Labour Party at the time of a Mars-Saturn conjunction, and that is not a great time to become leader. It really isn't, and it's saying something about his leadership. Everything is difficult with Mars-Saturn, and it's also linked kind of with Uranus. So you've got Uranus up here. So Mars is kind of making a semi-square to the Uranus-Saturn midpoint. So it's all difficult. Putting energy into something which is a real grind. And if you think about Starmer, of course Starmer continued with Britain's support for Europe's or NATO's war against Russia. So Starmer just keeps going. So he's kind of imprisoned by the past, and he can't really break out. And what's happened, in terms of blame. So when the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, became prime minister. Sorry, came into office, and she had her budget. She certainly blamed the Conservatives, and she talked about a black hole. There was a black hole in the nation's finances, which had to be filled with more taxation. And of course now it's getting out that this black hole maybe didn't exist, that maybe Rachel Reeves was deceiving Parliament and deceiving deceiving the country, and she was just using it as an excuse to raise more taxes in order to pursue the Labour Party's agenda, which many are saying now is taking money from working people to put that money in the hands of those seeking welfare. So this is either. I'm not making any opinion on that. I'm just saying that these are the kind of issues that we have. So Rachel Reeves is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and she's getting a huge amount of pressure at the moment. I mean, she is really getting it. And a lot of these people, like Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, we don't have any times of birth for them. It's really annoying. So this is a fundamental problem at the moment. We're dealing with British politics. I mean we knew the horoscope of we knew the time of birth of David Cameron. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were both born in Scotland, which is great because on Scottish birth certificates they put the time of birth. They don't put the time of birth on on English or I think Welsh Welsh birth certificate. So here is the horoscope of Rachel Reeves, who is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and she has been accused of lying, deceiving Parliament. There have been calls for her resignation. So it's a very difficult job being Chancellor of the Exchequer. But nonetheless, she doesn't appear to be necessarily very good at it. And also, there's questions about her lying about her CV, claiming she was an economist. I think she claimed she was an economist at Bank of England, which apparently isn't true. She was claiming to have high-powered sort of economic roles for different banks, and I think one bank, was it Halifax or something? I think it was. She was involved in customer complaints or something, and she wasn't actually involved in anything heavy duty. Although she does have a degree in economics. I think she might have 2 degrees in economics. So academically, she's got the qualifications, but in terms of her experience of economics, there have certainly been questions about it. And I don't find her chart especially interesting. I mean, we know that she's got a lot of planets in Aquarius. You could say that her Mercury is close to the Sun. Now, if she was born by day, then Mercury might not have much dignity there, because Mercury rules the air signs by night. And so Mercury would have some dignity if that was by night, but not by day. But still, she does have Mercury conjunct the Sun, and it is potentially quite a difficult sun, because sometimes we forget when we're thinking about sun signs that there are positions of exaltation and there are positions of detriment. The Sun is in its detriment in Aquarius. Now, that doesn't mean to say that all Aquarians will suffer from that, but maybe Mercury conjunct the Sun in her case is indicating someone who doesn't know as much as she thinks, or it could be someone that is perhaps deceptive, maybe not deliberately deceptive, but she's just giving a sort of a misleading opinion. And you'd also look at Neptune if you think about the deception with Rachel Reeves. And I don't see a huge amount going on with Neptune. I thought that sort of Neptune might be more prominent in her chart, but it doesn't seem to be. Okay, Neptune at 20 degrees Sagittarius. Okay, she's got Mars sextile Neptune. So if you've got Mars sextile Neptune, and there's also the Sun sextile Neptune, maybe she's quite good at putting energy into creating smoke screens, creating something that isn't necessarily true. I mean, it's quite subtle though. These are not very sort of exact aspects. So I'm not convinced that her Neptune is that powerful. Though she does have Neptune square her nodes, and so I mean it's a generational thing. But given she's an important person, she's Chancellor of the Exchequer, so perhaps she sort of picks up on these Neptune node aspects, and she's maybe finding that deception is easy. It's easy to be a bit economical with the truth with Neptune square the nodes, and so that is a possible manifestation of it. Now, I want to actually focus on just one thing in her chart, one thing which might seem completely obscure, but I do think it's important, and it is her Uranus. So her Uranus is at 20 degrees Scorpio. You will notice, by the way, that Mercury went stationary direct just recently on her Uranus. So, I mean, I'll be coming on to that in a moment. So the question is, what midpoints is her Uranus on? And so let's just look at her 90-degree dial. So here is the 90-degree dial of Rachel Reeves, and so So we're going to put the pointer on Uranus, and so the question is, yeah, what midpoints is that on? And so we notice that her Uranus is on her Sun Mars midpoint. So her Sun Mars midpoint is at 21-25 Aquarius, and so she's got her Uranus. What did I say? Her Uranus at what was it? 2020 Scorpio. So it's making a hard aspect, semi-square sesquiquadrate aspect to it. So she's got her Uranus on the Sun Mars midpoint. So someone with Uranus on the Sun Mars midpoint could be quite accident prone. I mean, Sun and Mars as a pair can create a huge amount of controversy, and they can Sun and Mars can get itself into trouble, and it can sort of really be rather too into itself. I mean, let's look at what Reinhold Ebertin says about Uranus on the Sun Mars midpoint in his Combination of Stellar Influences, a book that I would always recommend if you're into astrology to buy this book. So Uranus on the Sun Mars midpoint, he says, premature action or hastiness, impulsive behavior, the tendency to do one's work in a state of excitement, the overtaxing of one's strength, sudden events, adjustment to new conditions or circumstances, change of vocation, military call-up. So, if you're Chancellor of the Exchequer, Britain's finance minister, this is talking about hastiness, this constant sense of panic and tension, feeling you have to act. I like this word, the overtaxing of one's strength. I like that. The overtaxing, perhaps, of one's country, not just one's own strength. So you perhaps push things to their limit. But it's not just the fact that she's got Uranus on her Sun Mars midpoint. She's also got Uranus on her Jupiter Saturn midpoint. And that, I think, is very relevant, because Jupiter Saturn as a pair, as I constantly say, is about the business cycle. It's about economics. It's about whether we're in the recession, growth. It's a very financial pairing, and it does link to society in general. So having someone with Uranus on the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, and also as Uranus on the Sun-Mars midpoint, as having them as Chancellor of the Exchequer, strikes me as being a really bad idea. Someone who is just going to be a disaster. I mean, simply because of those two midpoints, because they're so relevant to her job, the job she has chosen. She should have steered clear of economics. I mean, I know she has degrees in economics, but this is not an area she should have basically had any particular senior role in, any sort of executive or administrative role with those two midpoints. And so, and I do think this is relevant, and I'm just going to explain why. So recently, Rachel Reeves had her budget. Budget is a big event in the British calendar, in the British political calendar. It happens every year, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer makes a speech to Parliament, and she says what she's going to do. She's going to say how taxes are going to change, and it was a disaster, because there's a big thing about the budget is that obviously details of the budget should not be leaked, because if people know beforehand what's going to be in the budget, that might influence, for example, what they do, what the markets do. And it was leaked left, right, and centre. And I think the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, there was a leaked PDF which basically said what was in the budget. So the whole thing was a complete disaster. So here is the chart of the budget speech that she made on November the 26th, 2025, I think it was at 12:30. It came right after Prime Minister's questions, which I think happens on a Wednesday. So here's the chart for 12:30, and you will see I mean, maybe she started a bit later, but at 12:30 she was scheduled to start her budget speech at 12:30 London time. The midheaven was at 14 degrees 22 Sagittarius, and there was an exact Mars true black moon Lilith conjunction on the midheaven, and that is, a terrible signature. And it also linked with the nodes. So the north node, the south node, were hitting at. So that is a really bad time to have a budget with that configuration to the midheaven. And the moon, the moon was making a sextile to Mars. I mean, that's one good thing to say about it, but overall, it just doesn't look too good because of that Mars on the midheaven, and Mercury was still retrograde. So there's that Mercury retrograde, and Venus was still in Scorpio. So I think that it wasn't great. And then you have the question of what transits was she having at the time of a budget. So looking at what was going on for Rachel Reeves at the time of a budget. Remember, I was talking about Uranus and how strong her Uranus was. Not how strong, but the midpoints it was on. It was on the Sun-Mars midpoint, and it was also on the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. And look at Mercury. Mercury at 2141 retrograde was conjunct her Uranus. And so Mercury stationed at 2040. Mercury was stationed at 2045. So Mercury has stationed over the last couple of days, or last weekend, exactly on her Mercury. So, sorry, Mercury stationed exactly on her Uranus. So normally you'd think Uranus is just a collective planet. It's transpersonal, but she's a politician. She's an important politician. So I think her Uranus as a transpersonal planet linked with the collective is suddenly going to really really matter. So in other words, Mercury is stationed on her Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, it's stationed on her Sun-Mars midpoint, and it's stationed on her Uranus. And I think that is one of the things which is causing her so many problems right now, and why things have suddenly become really, really difficult for her. So I think it was part of her problems have emerged since the budget. And so it is really difficult. And so this is why you need to look at when Mercury goes stationary direct, what does it hit? And in the case of Rachel Reeves, it hit her Uranus in a big way. And then we get other evidence relating to her Uranus if we look at her solar arc direction. So Rachel Reeves, she's born in 1979, so this year she's just turned 46, and so we can then look at her solar arc directions. So with her solar arc directions, we move everything 1 degree per year, and so if you take 46 degrees, because she was born, when was she born? She was born on February the 13th. So 46 days after February the 13th is April the 1st, April Fool's Day. So April Fool's Day was 46 days after she was born. So maybe there's something foolish about her progressed planets right now. And as far as the progressions are concerned, the solar arc direction is concerned, one thing we notice is that Uranus her solar arc directed Uranus is at 7 degrees 43 Capricorn. So Uranus, and remember, Uranus is taking with it the Sun-Mars midpoint and the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. So that configuration is moving towards her Venus. Now we don't have her precise time of birth, but it's it's only it's a year off. So I think she's already starting to feel it. Uranus on her Venus. Venus, she obviously being a woman, her Venus is going to be an important part of her, part of who she is. It's not a projected planet, so she's certainly getting that, and I think that would probably be hitting her quite hard. But it's more than that. Her Venus is under further pressure from the Sun. So the Sun has just made a square to her directed Sun has made a square to her Venus. Now that would have been when she became Chancellor, I assume, and so you might say that we now have Mars applying to the square of Venus. So this Sun-Mars, so this directed Sun-Mars conjunction, remember she's got a Sun-Mars conjunction, that directed Sun-Mars is really hitting her Venus. So what's happening, that configuration I talked about, Uranus on the Sun-Mars midpoint, Uranus on the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, it's all hitting her Venus, and I think that is one reason why she is in so much trouble. I mean, there is this question of how long is it going to last? How long is it going to be before the whole thing collapses, before she goes? And of course, the trouble is, if she goes, Starmer has to go, and in terms of making predictions about that, they're quite stubborn, these people. But I'm thinking that the key chart to look at is probably the moment that Starmer became Prime Minister, which was July the 5th, 2024, and you've got a descendant of 1 degree 48, and I'm thinking that when Saturn and Neptune go into Aries, the beginning of next year, I mean, that's when the problems are really going to start. So when Saturn, for example, when Saturn and Neptune get towards 1 degree 48, the descendant represents perhaps Starmer's enemies and all the people in his party who are trying to replace him. It's not like there's going to be another election. They're just going to choose another leader. But I think that in the new year, with that Saturn-Neptune conjunction on a descendant, I would have thought that would be the time when you'd expect something to happen. And I just want to switch political parties and briefly talk about the horoscope of Kemi Badenoch. So Kemi Badenoch is the leader of the Conservative Party, and it's kind of interesting. She's a Capricorn, and if you look at what people have been saying about Kemi Badenoch since she became leader, I mean, she was elected leader by the Conservative Party at the end of last year. So she's been in this position for a year, and absolutely universally complete wall-to-wall criticism. Everyone was just saying how completely useless she was, and the position of the opinion polls, the Conservatives just went down. I think the Conservatives are on something like 17% at the moment. They do appallingly in council by-elections. It just looks a complete disaster. And people were saying, how long before she goes? And her performance at Prime Minister's Questions Time was often sort of clumsy, and she missed open goals. And everyone thought, from left and right, everything was saying that she was just completely useless. Now, when I looked at her chart, I just wasn't. I was never convinced by that analysis, because she's a Capricorn, and what struck me about Kemi Badenoch's horoscope was that she's somehow linked with the horoscope of England. So if you take the English horoscope when William the Conqueror was crowned, on Christmas Day 1066. There was certainly a linkage between Kemi Badenoch and that horoscope. So here is the chart of England, and if we put so I'm putting Kemi Badenoch on the outer wheel. So Kemi Badenoch was born on January the 2nd of 1980, but that's using the Gregorian calendar, and of course both charts, both the English. You see, I've got December the 31st chart for England, but that's because this program converts it to Gregorian, converts Julian to Gregorian. In a Julian calendar, that links to Christmas Day. So Kemi Badenoch's sun is within 2 degrees of Britain's sun, so England's sun, the 1066 sun. So from a 1066 perspective, it's England, maybe even the UK, is a Capricorn country, and Kemi Badenoch is a Capricorn. So she links with the country in that sense. And also, there is that Capricorn emphasis. Kemi Badenoch has the Sun and Mercury. Well, she might have Mercury in Capricorn. We don't know, because I don't know her time of birth. She has her Mercury certainly on England's Uranus. Additionally, she's got planets in Virgo. Kemi Badenoch has the North Node, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn in Virgo, and that kind of links with England's Virgo planets. Well, England and Kemi Badenoch have both got Saturn in Virgo, and both got North Node in Virgo. Actually, Rachel Reeves has got North Node in Virgo as well, but that doesn't seem to help. But yeah, I just thought that there were a few similarities there between Kemi Badenoch and the England, even though we don't have her time of birth. And I just looked at that chart, and I just didn't. My immediate feeling was I didn't feel that she was quite as bad as other people were claiming. And when you're dealing with a Capricorn, one thing it's said about Capricorns is that Capricorns try hard. Once they're in a position, that it's perhaps difficult to get them out, and there is perhaps this learning process, and perhaps Capricorns can sort of develop into the role. And what's happened, that as a result of that budget speech, Kemi Badenoch responded, and her response was, regarded as being, very impressive. It was, although she was reading from notes, it was an incredible criticism of Kemi Badenoch, which people from the left and the right has universally thought was really good. I mean, she had already been improving, since there was a Conservative Party conference when her conference speech went down well. So over the last few months, that has been an improvement, and her position as leader of the Conservative Party is much stronger compared to what it was, say, 6 months ago. And it might be that this is just Capricorn in action. And comparing Kemi Badenoch with the budget speech, I mean, her response to the budget speech, okay, her response wasn't at 12:30; it was a bit later, but I just thought that would be interesting, because seems to the budget speech, Kemi Badenoch's response to the budget speech seems to have been a turning point in her leadership, and it may well be that will soon be reflected in her polls, because not so long ago people thought that she was in imminent danger of having to stand down. So how it worked, this budget speech for her. So there is Kemi Badenoch's Venus, so Venus in Aquarius, and the moon was at around 14 Aquarius when it was around 14 Aquarius when she responded to Rachel Reeves. And so the moon on her Venus really does seem to have worked well for her. And it's interesting, though, that the South Node was at 14 Virgo, and Kemi Badenoch's Mars is at 14 Virgo as well. So Kemi Badenoch's reply to Claire Reeves, so to Rachel Reeves, was very personal. I mean, it was incredibly attacking, but it was the right level of attack. I mean, Kemi Badenoch had a reputation for being someone who picks fights. So they say about her, if she sees a fight on the other side of a street, she will cross the street to get involved in a fight. So that is part of her reputation. Kemi Badenoch does have a Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Virgo, and so sometimes she takes things too far. But it's just interesting that the nodal axis was on her Mars, and this makes us think about what the node actually is. Now, there is no doubt that her response to Rachel Reeves was very effective. Arguably, it completely saved her political career, and she's not going anywhere. She'll be remaining as Conservative leader for some time, I think, because of that. And so the South Node on the Mars, maybe it's a positive. She's got a North Node of Mars in Virgo, so she's got sort of wide Mars North Node axis. But so the South Node is saying how she responds to people. Maybe we shouldn't see the nodal axis as being just about our destiny and karma. Perhaps we should look at the nodes, how Ebertin and the Witter and how the German midpoint schools of astrology see the node as just being about a contact. And so when you've got the nodal axis on your Mars, what do? Well, you just you act in a Mars kind of way. You have an aggressive connection with another person, and in this case, she was right in front of Rachel Reeves on either side of the dispatch box in a House of Commons, just eviscerating her, and that just could be the South Node on her Mars. Now, the final question I want to consider is: will Kemi Badenoch ever be British Prime Minister? And certainly, if you'd asked that question, a few weeks ago, the answer would have been no. I think the answer is still pretty much no, as far as what people think. It just seems that people think, well, she doesn't have what it takes. But then she is a Capricorn, and I do think that her chart has a link with the English chart. I think that she has potentially. She is Prime Minister material, but I'm saying that without astrology. Well, how do I look at it in terms of astrology? Well, I don't have her time of birth. So the best I can do is set up a horary chart. In other words, I ask myself the question, is she going to become Prime Minister? And I set up a time for this. And I asked this question, I asked this question on last year, but just under a year ago, December the 7th, 2024. I asked the question: will Kemi Badenoch be Prime Minister by January the 1st, 2030? And if you look at this chart, the ascendant is 3 degrees Cancer. It's very early, and there is a rule in astrology, or maybe it's a stricture. I get them mixed up. That in horary astrology, at least some schools of horary astrology, the school of astrology that I use, William Lilly in the 17th century. But if you have got an ascendant which is under 3 degrees, you discard the chart. You can't read it. If the ascendant is later than 27 degrees of a sign, earlier than 3 degrees of a sign, you shouldn't read it. I think it's just about there at 3 degrees 18 Cancer, even though I think my coordinates for Lakewood, Washington are very slightly off, so it's but it's about 3 degrees Cancer. I think it's just about judgeable, this chart. But when you do have an early ascendant, it's often said, well, maybe it's too early to tell, but I think we can sort of go ahead and judge it. And I'm not saying I'm going to be able to give an answer with this chart, but if in terms of who Kemi Badenoch is, at the time she was leader of the opposition, I would take her as the ascendant. As far as my opinion, if you like, my prejudices are concerned, I don't have any issues with Kemi Badenoch. I'm not one of those people who think she's hopeless. I sort of wish her well. So that's my view on Kemi Badenoch. And we've always got to consider one's prejudices when using horary astrology. And so if you've got Cancer rising, you'd say that she was the moon. And so the moon is close to the 10th house. It's in the 10th house. It's in Pisces. So, I mean, the 10th house is where you'd want the moon to be if you if you want to be prime minister. So the moon is sort of correctly placed. There's no doubt about that. But the key question is, how do you evaluate the moon moving towards a conjunction of Saturn? So, I mean, by the way, the house of the moon is, at the time of the question, is telling you what is the question about. Clearly, this is a question about leadership. So I think that at some level, this horary chart is going to answer my question, although I'm not convinced I necessarily have an answer. So the question is, how do you deal with moon making a conjunction to Saturn? And Saturn is ruler of the 7th. You could say that Saturn represents the opposition. Saturn is in mixed reception with Venus. So Saturn is in Venus's exaltation degree. In its exaltation sign. Venus has just gone into Aquarius. So you could argue that Moon making that conjunction to Saturn does represent her eventually becoming prime minister. But then on the other hand, Saturn could represent the opponent, someone she is up against. But then on the other hand, maybe this chart is just a bit too early. We don't know for sure, and I'm still looking at this chart. So I'm just saying that this is not an easy chart to judge. I think if I had to be absolutely honest, I would probably say that she won't be prime minister on the basis of it, but I'm not sure. It's just that having that Moon-Saturn conjunction in the 10th is quite a powerful configuration. But I suppose one has to say that Saturn is not really connected with her, and I think on balance I'd have to say that although she's certainly done a lot to secure her position with her performance at the dispatch box, I think that this chart probably indicates that she won't be prime minister by January the 1st, 2030. But I probably need to look at this chart more. Maybe you have I know some of you watching are into horary astrology. You might have a different view, but I'd probably say no. But it would be a guarded no, and I did put a time limit on this chart. I said by January the 1st, 2030. I'm certainly not saying on the basis of this chart that she will never be prime minister. So those are a few thoughts on British politics. I will be returning to this subject, I think, sooner rather than later. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.